Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 856. My opponent with the white pieces played d4, and I went knight f6. And then he went e3. See, e3 is pretty far down the list, but it is actually kind of an interesting move because it doesn't entirely commit white to a particular system. There's a couple different ideas that he has here, well, three that I know of. One is that he can continue with f4. Well, bishop to d3 and f4 is usually how it's played, and that would be the stonewall attack. He could play the Colle system, as in this game, with c3, or he could play the Colle Zuckertort with b3. So interesting ways to play. The one thing you can say for sure is he's not playing the London system, since that bishop is locked in behind the pawn chain. Anyway, you have to play a move here that deals with all of these systems, and d5, good move, just putting a pawn in the center that's well supported by the queen and the knight, is the move I recommended in my black repertoire against d4 sidelines. That's the line that I'm following here. It's a good solid move here, and keeps black pretty much on an equal footing with white. So anyway, white continued with knight to f3 here, so he's ruled out the stonewall attack, and now we know he's going for some kind of Colle system. You play c5 here to loosen up the center. He goes c3 to defend it, and now this is definitely a Colle system. If it was a Colle Zuckertort, he would have been playing with b3. So I go e6. This is all part of my repertoire, and then he played a4, and at this point we're out of the opening book, and I didn't have anything specific in my repertoire about this move. It's not particularly good. In fact, the chess engine already gives an advantage to black here, but on the other hand, it's not an overwhelming advantage. Takes a couple of mistakes like that before the difference becomes insurmountable. So you have to keep playing solid moves. I go knight c6. He took here. I was also happy. I think this helps me a bit. I get to develop my bishop with a single move. If I went to d6 first, for example, and then he exchanged, and then I took, then that would be two moves to get to the same position with my bishop. He does kick my bishop back, but I really want the bishop to be on d6 anyway, so I'm not unhappy with that. And then he pushed a5. So this next move I played a6 to stop him from continuing to push those moves. But the chess engine points out I really could just go ahead and castle. And after this, because he's played so many pawn moves and he's neglected his development, look I've got three pieces out and I've castled, and he's only got one piece developed plus all these pawn moves. There's actually pretty close to a winning edge for black at this point. So my next move, when I played a6, it let him off the hook. I guess one important point is that he can't really play b5 here, because I can just take that a pawn. I've got my queen and my knight trained on it, so he's not going to be chasing me back by pushing those pawns forward. They're actually stopped already. So this a6 move is kind of a wasted move, and it lets white catch up some. So he starts developing his pieces. I castle. I still have an advantage, but it's not as big as it would have been. And white plays sensibly for a while, so he's just getting his pieces out. I push on with e5. This is a good move. I'm getting this move in with tempo because I'm threatening the fork here on e4. Let's see, he played bishop e2 to avoid that, and I went with bishop g4. I'm preparing actually to trade off this bishop for his bishop. That was, an undeveloped bishop that I'm bringing out here, and this is a bishop he's moved twice, so trading it off should be some edge to me, and also that's his better bishop in this structure, looking out at these openings, whereas this bishop, at least for the moment, is blocked in behind the pawns. So I think this is a reasonable plan. He castled here. I pushed on with e4 to force that trade. He goes knight d4, and I take off the bishop. And then I played rook e8. The chess engine thinks knight to e5 is a better move here, and I think I have to agree. Let's back up one move and look at this. Knight to e5 is threatening to come into the d3 square, and there's really not much he can do about it. He only has a dark squared bishop. His light squared bishop is gone, and his knights are pretty far away from being able to contest that square. So I can sink a knight into a good square and maybe put a rook on the C file will be open after the knight is out of the way. I can think about posting a knight to C4 if allowed, as well as going into the D3 square. So good position for black. I went rook to E8, which is not a bad move, but I had better, I guess. He went knight D2. And now I played a move that was a bit crazy. I would say I've made some maybe slight inaccuracies, but this move is the first one that's taking some real chances. And in fact, white with best play could probably come out of this with an edge, and I'll show in line that lets white get some kind of edge after a while. But I don't really regret this move, having said that. Admittedly, it's not the best move here, but you have to try these moves now and then, try these interesting and offbeat moves and just see how they work for you. If you get some pressure out of it, sometimes it turns out to be a big success. And even if it's not objectively the best move, it still can put pressure on your opponent and force him to think and come up with defensive ideas. So, try these out from time to time just to see how they work for you. Just to show better play here, the simple knight to e5 once again is good. And another interesting way to play this is to play with knight takes d4. If he takes this way, which is actually the recommendation, then you can simply win a pawn. And if he takes the other way, well, you have a rook behind this pawn, which is threatening to come forward and disrupt white's king side a little bit. So that would be interesting as well. Both are good for white. Anyway, I went rook to e5, and he goes c4, so not a bad rejoinder, and I go rook to h5. So I think it's the combination of rook e5 to rook h5 where after this the chess engine starts to prefer white, but not by a lot. But here it says I should probably just go ahead and grab the pawn. I was a little bit worried about discovered attacks against the rook here from the bishop, so I was kind of getting it out of the way in a hurry. But apparently this is playable. Rook takes, or knight takes b4, pawn takes, rook takes is the line given by the chess engine, and black is fine there. So rook h5 is where it gets to be an advantage for white. Let's see, plays g3, which is okay. I go queen d7. There is one interesting line here. I just wanted to show you. This actually, I think, ends up in equality, so it's not necessarily a great move for either side, but it's just an interesting display of the tactics on board here. On the board, so I can take this pawn, and he can play the move knight to c6. I probably would not have thought of this move in a long time. Let's see. Well, it's hitting my queen, which is loose, and it's hitting my knight, which is loose. But of course, I can take his knight. So what's the idea? The idea is this: bishop takes knight. And that's a move that comes with tempo because the knight was defending my rook, which is under attack by his queen. So let's see. I should take the bishop and he should take the rook. And I've gained a pawn and lost the exchange. And I have active pieces, I guess. My king is pretty safe. Maybe my pawn structure is a little better than white's. Anyway, the net of all the compensation for the exchange is that it's probably about even in the eyes of the chess engine. So just a funny way to play. Anyway, I went queen d7 here. He took my knight, and with the same idea, he's going to take off this knight and leave my rook hanging. But I have a nice move here in queen h3. It defends my rook and threatens checkmate. So he has to deal with that. And now here's the point in the game where white could have gotten an edge. I think it was really after the opening, this was the only chance that white had to get an advantage. And that would be to play the move f4. He's got to defend against the mate threat somehow, and this seems to be the best defense. I would play pawn takes. He has to take with the knight because he needs the queen to defend here. And then I need to take the bishop because I'm down a piece. I've got to get my piece back, so I have to take the bishop. And he can take here on d5, and I take back. And the chess engine gives white an advantage here. It's white's turn to move. He does have a hanging pawn over here, but in general, the total number of pawns is the same. He has time to defend it if he wants to. He could also just counterattack my pawns. The problem is really that my pawn structure is a disaster, and my king e is a little bit weaker. So even though I've got my pieces menacingly posted around white's king, he can fend them off, and he just has the better structure. And so this is the place in the game where white could have come out with an advantage. After I played queen h3, yeah, with the move f4. Instead, he played what at first looked like a very strong move. He played bishop to h4 because he's saving this bishop. He's staying a piece ahead. And, well, now my rook is hanging, and he stopped the mate. So it seems like he's solved a bunch of problems at once. But after a while, I realized I could just take that bishop because there's another mate threat involving the queen and the bishop if he takes my rook, so he can't take my rook. So the material is even after that. He got my knight and I got his bishop, and I still have this ongoing attack and pressure against his king. So once again, I'm slightly better here. He goes f4. He found this defensive idea now. I take, and he takes with the knight. And then I drop down to h6. Actually, this move lets him into the game. If I had played rook to g4 here, I'm keeping a pretty significant edge here. So, for example, if he takes, I guess he doesn't have anything better to do. That was the line. I can go ahead and sacrifice on g3 now, and he can't really take the bishop. This loses because of rook takes, and rook to g2 wins the queen for the rook, so that will be a win. So after bishop takes g3, actually he has to play king h1, and who knows if he would find that move, but that's the only move that is playable. I still have an advantage, a good attack, but this allows him some ideas like bringing the rook over here to contest the g file, and also it means that I can't move my bishop with a discovered check on his king. So anyway, white hangs on for a while longer, but this is still a good position for white and probably winning. Just a longer struggle. So rook h6 is not as precise. So that was a mistake. It's funny, I did not even really think about this rook g4 move, but it's pretty logical, seeing that I had two other pieces lined up on the g3 square, and I had already thought a little bit about whether a sacrifice worked there as a way to increase pressure. Anyway, I dropped the rook back to h6. Guess I was still thinking about pressure on the h file. I have to give that up and switch targets. And now he went knight to g5. Let's see. There was a move here. Oh yeah, just taking the pawn here. And this is about even. Knight to g5 allows me to, well, he's hitting my queen. I have to save it. And this move here leads to a position where I have that slight edge that I go into the endgame with. And he can't really avoid it. I mean, he could avoid the trade. There's one move here. He can retreat the knight. I mean, both his queen and his knight were hanging. But he can retreat the knight to f3 and block my view of the queen. So he can avoid the trade, but then I can grab the pawn, and I come out of this a slight advantage. I think basically a pawn up. But a similar kind of thing happens in the endgame. He trades. He gets the f7 pawn in this line, and then I get the b4 pawn. So for the moment, it's equal, but my pieces are just better placed, and my pawns are a little better. So I'm effectively a pawn up. And as happened in the game, and in most lines I checked with the chess engine, I just do end up with a pawn, an extra pawn. So he's playing this part okay. He can't really do much better. He takes here. I took with the rook. He played rook a to b1, hitting my bishop, and I defend it. Played e4, hitting my rook. I drop back. Played knight to e5, and I go rook to e7. And this is one of the problems, is that it's no good way for him to defend the e-pawn. He gives it up pretty readily here, but going for, he wants to get rid of this bishop here. And so we go directly into an endgame where I have an extra pawn. He takes and I take. And I think this should be winning. There is one more place in the game where I let him back into it and he has a drawing chance. But I think with correct play I should be able to win this. And I do okay for a while. So let's follow how it goes. He played rook f to c1. That's good, getting his rook active. I went rook to b8. I think that's okay, just getting my rook behind the pawn, preparing to push it down. He goes rook to c6, hitting my pawn, and I go on with b3. And I had already calculated that he can't afford to take that pawn, because I would put my rook over here, and then I could play yeah, put my rook here, push this pawn forward, and then bring my rook in with check, and that happens faster than he can queen this a pawn with his rook in front of it. So he can't afford to take that pawn. So he played an interesting move here, almost a waiting move. He went rook b2, and this next move, rook b5, is not the best. I should have just played rook a4, and this keeps that winning edge. In fact, I'm very quickly coming in here with rook a2, chasing his knight back, pushing the pawn forward, and then going with rook a1, and that's just a pretty simple win. So that was my fastest win here. I went rook b5 instead, and I was still thinking of how to get my rook to the C file. Maybe I was going to play something like this and bring it over this way, but now that's just a little bit too slow. And all the time I had this rook a4 possibility waiting for me. I keep ignoring it. Just didn't think of it because I had first thought of this, putting the rook on the C file, and I got too fixated on that idea. So he can grab the pawn now. This is okay. And I went rook to c4. Once again, if I went rook a4, it'd be a little bit quicker, and I cancel that. And I keep an edge, I think. It's still winning. But after rook to c4, this is that point in the game. I've just played a little too slowly here with my rooks, and he has one chance to draw it. And it goes like this, just to show how he can get out of this situation. He starts with a check, drives my king up, pushes the pawn forward. So I play rook c2. That was my plan, and that's the right idea here. He keeps pushing his pawn forward, and now this is trouble. So say I take his rook, for example. He can go here with check, and then get a queen with check, and this is going to be at least, it's funny, well, I have two rooks and a pawn. My rooks are not communicating with each other. I don't know if there's a way here for him to directly win this, but he's at least equal here. Anyway, the chess engine says the best move is not to take his rook, but to play rook to a5, threatening mate. Well, that's a good idea. So he has to take my rook, then I take back, and then he plays rook to c8, and now I can't queen my pawn, and he can't queen his, and the best we have is just to let's see, it's my turn. It's just to take this pawns, and this is even. So that was his chance to draw. And anyway, he missed that. He played rook to b6 here. That was probably not too easy to see that whole line, but it's interesting that the possibility was there. But anyway, after rook b6, then I am once again winning, and I don't make any big blunders the rest of this. So I keep that winning advantage the rest of the way. He trades, and I get my rook here. So I'm just a pawn up, and it's interesting how this goes. Sometimes king and just having one extra pawn is not enough, but when it's a pawn that's far away like this from the rest of the pawns, then you can always just trade. If he ever takes that pawn, he has to take it with the rook, and then you take back, and then you just have to make sure your king is close enough to these pawns over here to win them before white can come over and win these pawns. And so you have the advantage because his king has to come over here to take back, so you're going to be closer to this side of the board. So that's the general winning idea. So he can't take, but if he avoids taking, then you just improve your position bit by bit. You push things forward. I think actually, technically speaking, this was not the best move here. You kind of want to give yourself those extra tempo moves. Sometimes you want to go here and then here to give yourself a tempo move in the case of a Zugzwang. But I think this is still winning after h5. Well, I know it's still winning after h5, but maybe not best technically. Let's see, he went king d3. Yeah, that's the point. If I had avoided that h5 move, I could have gotten my king one step closer to this side of the board. That would have been a better move. Anyway, I played h5, he went king d3, and now I have to do some kind of maneuvering to find a way to get my king in. He keeps bringing his king over, preventing my king from coming forward. So anyway, I bring my rook forward, and then I march my king over to the other side. So you kind of fake to one side and then go to the other side. And then this is a tempo move. I drop back at a time when he can't come forward with his king, can't take this pawn. He can't move this pawn, so he either drops his rook back or moves his king. He went king to c3 here, and now I get to move my king forward. And this was just the maneuver I used to make progress, and now I've effectively broken through, and with 2 pawns the win becomes easy. And at this point he ran out of time, but pretty simple win. So anyway, fun game, an instructive end game, and see you guys later. Bye.